Hello again, whiskey friends. Thanks for joining, everybody. I'm pretty excited to get in today's content here. This is going to come directly from a question asked by one of our patrons, Hendo, one of our favorite whiskey friends. Cheers to Hendo. But he asked if it has to be barrel proof or high proof to get a high score. And I thought that was a very interesting question. Here on the channel, we do have a scoring system that we have been investing in all year. Thus far, we're up to 91 recorded tastes. So essentially, like one a day since we've been recording these things between either Kelsey Durrell and I. And we can use the data in interesting ways to answer these type of questions. So I am excited to get into the data again. I think it's been about 6 weeks since I did a video like this. I've got all of my charts all ready to go. We're going to go through the data and get kind of nerdy with it. But I think it's pretty interesting how it netted out. I'm not too surprised, but ultimately, proof is important, but it's not guaranteed that it's going to get a good score if it is high proof. But we will get more into that and all the nitty gritty details. Let's kick off the show so we can get into the content. Thanks for joining, everybody. All right. And I already gave a big shout out to Hendo, one of our favorite whiskey friends. Thanks for all the support, buddy. And man, I'm going to shout out somebody else. So while we're talking about this topic, I am going to be sipping on a Journeyman Corsets, Whips, and Whiskeys. Uh, look at that sticker right there. I thought that was part of the label. And then I found out that Wise Guy Stu actually put that sticker on there for me as a joke. And I was trying to ask somebody else about this bottle and if they had that sticker on there and how funny it was. And they had no idea what I was talking about. And then Stu chimed in and was like, I put that sticker on there, Jeff. But thank you, Stu, for this delicious pour. This is going to be the second time that I've explored this one as I'm chatting with everybody. And this will be an upcoming review as well. So essentially, this will probably be number 92 tonight. After I do this, I'll probably sit with this one for a few hours before I score it tonight. But man, am I really looking forward to scoring this one. This one was also a store pick, too. We'll get into more of the details for the review. But man, really good whiskey, especially this one coming out of Journeyman. So cheers, everybody. So let's get into that's really good. Let's get into the topic at hand. And that is going back to Hendo's question. Does it have to be barrel proof or high proof to get a high score? So I'm going to pull up some data here and kind of give an answer to that. But we're also going to step through the data in some other ways because I got a whole bunch of points to make based on my analysis of this data. So I'm going to pull up the chart here and explain it in just a moment. We'll get kind of nerdy with the layout and everything, but I'll walk through the data. But we do go through and log our tastings. So all the reviews that we do for the channel, we have a spreadsheet behind the scenes that we are keeping track of all these nitty gritty details on. I mean, not only do I make poor Durrell and Kelsey give their score to 10 different metrics, and it has to do all these equations to get to the total score. And, I try to confuse the heck out of them. I also make them record price, proof, age, distillery. Is it finished? Is it not finished? What's the secondary grain? What's the primary grain? I mean, anything I can categorize, store pick, group pick, not pick. That way I can cut the data by all these different data points later as we accumulate more and more over the course of this year. And we've just been doing this since essentially mid-January, and we're up to 91 tastes. So you can see the data for all 91 of the tastes that we have recorded thus far plotted in the chart here. So the y-axis, the vertical axis, is proof. Proof ranges from 80 to 160. And then you got the total scores running across the bottom as the horizontal axis. I put that from 50 to 100. Now, the way that our scoring system works is essentially that's a percentage of possible points. So when something got 50 points, that means it only got 50% of the possible points that it could. If it gets 100, that means it got 100% of all the possible points that it could. And we grade things mainly on flavor components, experience components, and then there is a metric in there for value. Flavor is all about how good it tastes, either from the nose, the front of the palate, mid palate, the finish, just how enjoyable is it. Whereas the experience is more about the mouth feel and the complexity of the flavors and the length of the finish. So, as we're going through that, kind of keep those metrics in mind because I am going to go back to them. Now, what you see on the chart right here might look relatively random. If I were to add a trend line to this, though, there is a through line that does link total score to proof. For those that want to get real nerdy, the R squared on this was 0.35. So that essentially means that 35% of the variance in this data could be explained between these 2 points. So there's definitely a relationship there, but we're going to get into it. I mean, high proof does not mean high score. It doesn't automatically translate that way. You still have to deliver, but high proof does give you an advantage in our particular scoring system, except for one outlier that we'll get to as well. So here's the data here. The thing I really want to highlight first is, anything on the channel that scores between an 80 and a 90, that gets classified as a great pour. 90 to 100 is an amazing pour. So when it comes to being a great pour or higher, I mean, you pretty much have to be over 100 proof. That is what it's saying here, if not over 105 proof. The higher the proof, the more likely you are to get a higher score in this range. There is only one outlier so far, which will be the next slide. But it makes sense, though, as I think about it, because going back to what I was saying before, we got the flavor components, which is just how enjoyable it is. That does not require proof. But when we are getting into complexity, particularly with the nose, the mouth feel, the length of the finish, you're now getting into really how oily that thing is, or how deep it is, or how much the volume is turned up on it. And a lot of the times that does require proof to shine through. So we are proof snobs, obviously, as you could see this, uh, but there's a reason for it. I mean, that proof does help the whiskey shine through. It turns up the volume. It makes it oilier. It adjusts that length of the finish. I mean, the best finishes I've had are typically barrel proof whiskeys. Now, there is a difference between barrel proof and high proof. That's important to keep in mind. There are some bottles that I have, such as the Russell's 2003. That's 89 proof, but it's barrel proof as well, and it's oily as heck. So yeah, there's a distinction between barrel proof and high proof. So I'm really looking at high proof here. And as you see from that green box, being higher proof, 105 or higher, is kind of needed to score in the 80s or 90s. So that's interesting. Now, there is an outlier, and I'll highlight that on the next screen here. The only bourbon or whiskey so far to score higher than an 80 and be under 100 proof is the Michter's 10-year bourbon from 2023. So this is a review that Durrell recorded and will be coming out, probably within the next week here. So come back to the channel and look for that one. That thing is amazing. Another shout out to a patron, Big Vic. I guess this is the video shout outs here. But Big Vic gave me a sample of this when I was in LA a few weeks ago for WrestleMania. And I was taken aback by how awesome that sample was. I mean, that Michter's 10-year comes across as something way older than 10 years. I mean, I would guess 15 years. A couple times in his video, Darrell's going to equate it to being kind of a cheaper Michter's 20. Like if you want something that equates more to the Michter's 20, it's this year's Michter's 10-year single barrel that he has. And I have to agree with him entirely. That is the exact same thing that came to my mind. That's a bottle that I really want this year now because of that particular sample. So thank you, Vic. Cheers, buddy. But that is the only outlier. So it's possible, but Now, the other thing to think about too, going back to what I said before about high proof and barrel proof. I mean, Michter's has that notoriously low entry when it comes to the barrel proof. So they're not watering it down too much to get it to that 97 when it comes to those single barrels. So That just helps translate it to that oilier, richer feel if they don't have to add that much water. So proof isn't necessarily everything, but man, we only got one example. So your odds are a lot stronger if you're above 100 proof, if not 105 proof. But proof does not equal quality. I think that's the other thing to kind of look at as you see this chart is how much variance there is in the data. So the once again, only 0.35 is explained, if we were to put this into a model by the relationship between proof and score. And that is because of the pores that you see in this red box. Just because you're high proof doesn't mean we like what you're doing. And I bet you a lot of these things as I was going through them, they lost a lot of points on flavor. Uh, Maybe they still had the mouthfeel, maybe they still had the length of the finish, but even if that length of the finish was there, just didn't appreciate what it was doing. So you have to have a balance of all of those metrics to essentially get 80 or higher. You got to bring the flavor and you got to bring in the experience. And you got to have some value in you too. You can't be overpriced. So it takes that balance of all those things to score higher in our system. And I really like how that's working so far. But if you add up all of these dots, I mean, it's like a 50-50 chance if you're going to be above an 80 or below an 80. So proof ain't everything. That is for sure. The other thing that we've been doing quite a bit lately, I have been just re-exploring all the shelfers. When I first pulled up the charts from this data a couple weeks ago, there was a big hole in the data, particularly around lower proof and this range. This is actually exactly what I wanted to take a stab at and see how they started, playing out. Either if I were to map this based on price or proof. It's kind of the same thing when it comes to these shelfers. And I have definitely felt a rhythm there where these shelfers are landing between the 60s and the 70s. And when I say shelfers, I'm talking about the JTS brown, not the GTS brown that I said like a dozen times on that video. Thank you for someone pointing that out in the comments. The Legion. I'm actually looking at all my floor whiskey, which is really unfortunate because there's a lot of floor whiskey down here. The Buffalo Trace, the Wellers. I've just been trying to get those. The Evan Williams Bottle and Bond. Those are the type of ones that we're talking about with all these dots here. Are the more shelfer bourbons, $20-$30 range. And they have been coupling essentially around 70, which is great. That's actually a really good thing because it shows you the value in those bottles. Because look at all the higher proof, most likely more expensive bottles that are right above it and scored the exact same way. So that's the thing that really makes those bottles shine. But as I've been doing those reviews, the bottle and bonds and lower, I've felt the coupling. And the main reason that these things are scoring in the 70s, I think, is due somewhat to that lack of proof that plays into it. The noses are muted and the mouthfeel is sometimes there. Actually, I think the mouthfeel component, especially on some 100 proofs, has actually stood out. But the complexity of flavors isn't always there, and the like the finish isn't always there, right? So that's what's holding those scores back. Not necessarily the flavor scores, but that experience score does get held back on these shelfers and causes them to start clustering in this range. So that was another point that I wanted to make here as I kind of get to understand that data. That was the whole point of doing all this, was to get those recorded essentially as benchmarks in the scoring system so that we can do stuff like this and have them represented. So going back to the original question, does a high score need high proof? And the answer is yes, but it doesn't automatically equate to a high score. But it does need that proof to punch through, to give you that extra level of flavors, of complexity, the length of the finish, the mouthfeel. It does need the high proof. So yes, I am a high proof snob, and I will admit it. So that concludes the answering of today's whiskey question and discussion. Let me know what you think of this topic in the comments. Are you all about the high proof? Am I underrating the lower proofs? And if so, which ones? What's kind of your favorite lower proof whiskeys? Now, one thing to note too, as kind of a parting shot, everything that you just saw there is primarily bourbons and ryes. Haven't got into scoring scotches or Irish whiskeys too often yet. Man, malted barley is a totally different game. It can take to water a lot better than these. So it will be interesting when we get into those, if those start breaking apart the system and getting more of those outliers in the 80s that are lower proof. I wouldn't be surprised if that starts to happen with some of the scotches as we get into that, once I feel comfortable reviewing scotches at least. Well, thank you for joining today, everybody. If you have a question for a future video like this, please put it in the comments here. Hit us up on Instagram. Hit us up on Patreon. We will get to those topics, as quickly as we can. I love doing these videos when they are, topics that people are asking me on. That really helps creating this content. So please, everyone's done such a good job loading us with topics here over the last year. Let's keep it going. Let's keep this train moving. Thank you for joining today, whiskey friends. Thank you for this delicious whiskey stew. Thank you for the delicious sample, Vic. And thank you for the question, Hendo. Whew, lots of shouts outs. And we'll shout out a bit more. Hey, let's play the exit video. Cheers, everybody. I'll catch you on the next one.
Jeff, just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends, and you say hello again. Oh, Jeffrey, you should just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends.